Welcome, everyone. Our Aspen Brain Institute has just launched our new Expert Speaker Series 2.0. Welcome to our growing community of global seekers, seeking to be educated and delighted at the cutting edge. Hello to people all over the US and 103 countries who have registered for this series. Thank you all for tuning in. We're offering our new free series in order to build an online global community focused on brain health. We'd like to thank Lugano Diamonds for their generous support as our national underwriter. We thank Lugano Diamonds for choosing Aspen Institute as a nonprofit worthy of their support and their values, and for making our Zoom Expert Series free to the public and able to be viewed free worldwide. We also thank Alpine Bank for their generous support and sponsorship over many years now. And thanks to our friends at Brain Futures, who are translating science to advance human potential. And also to our friends at the American Federation for Research on Aging for their support. At our Expert Series 2.0, you will hear global leaders, deep thinkers, technology experts, cutting-edge scientists, top-notch doctors, and extraordinary creatives. We hope their insights will transform how you care for your brain today that your 80-year-old brain will thank you for. The Expert Series 2.0 underscores Aspen Brain Institute's mission to share access to the top minds and evidence-based research on brain health, to increase brain health literacy, and ultimately to create a brain healthy planet. It's my honor and privilege to bring to you these new episodes. Let's see what we can learn and explore together. I'd like you now for our expert series, please meet Mark Hodosh, who will introduce Dr. Rudy Tanzi. Mark is currently launching a new health conference with Dr. Sanjay Gupta and CNN. It's going to be a big deal, and it's going to happen next September in 2021. Mark Hodosh has previously co-created the very popular TED-Med. Mark, take it away. Let's hear from you and Dr. Tanzi.
Well, thank you, Glenda, and welcome everybody. It's really an honor, and excited to introduce Rudy today and have a conversation with him after his talk. For anybody who doesn't know, Dr. Rudy Tanzi is the Kennedy Professor of Neurology at Mass General Hospital and Harvard. He's won many awards, the Time 100 Most Influential People, among many other honors, for being the world leading expert in Alzheimer's and brain health. So Rudy, we're gonna let you speak for a little while, and then I've got a million questions to ask you afterwards. So take it away.
Thanks, Mark. I'm gonna share my screen, make sure that this works okay. And let's see. Tell me if are you able to see that?
I can.
Great. So first, just my disclosures of various companies with whom I consult or have financial interests. I will mention some of them. I will not be mentioning any off-label usage of any drugs in my talk today. I want to talk today about promoting a healthy brain and preventing—
And Rudy, your screen is, just so you know, your screen is getting cut off a bit. I don't know if there's an easy way for you to fix that.
That should not be. Is that better?
That's a little better. Maybe keep going.
A little push to the,
there you go. Yeah, we can see 98% now. Yeah.
That's
All
great.
right, hold on.
That's great.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Sorry, it's always tricky. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about promoting a healthy brain and preventing Alzheimer's disease. And I'm going to start by telling you the first thing you need to know, which is that while Alzheimer's disease only affects 5 to 6 million people in this country, meaning they have symptoms of dementia, if you ask how many people in this country already have Alzheimer's pathology in their brains without symptoms, meaning that they have a high chance of going on to getting symptoms of cognitive decline and dementia later, it's about 38 million. So in age-related diseases today, we keep track of when you're on your way to heart disease or diabetes or risk for stroke. But with Alzheimer's disease, we wait until the brain degenerates to the point that you can't think correctly, and then we try to treat it. And that's our first mistake. We need to bring Alzheimer's up to the same category as heart disease of early detection, early intervention, because the pathology and the process I'm going to show you that we've been studying, I've been studying this my whole career, 4 decades, happens to all of us as we age. So if you want to promote a healthy brain, as you age, you have to do all you can to stave off and reduce the neuropathology of Alzheimer's disease that I'm going to show you with your lifestyle, and hopefully with those who have genetics that don't allow that to happen with lifestyle will have drugs soon. So that will be what I talk about. So my first slide, if I can get it to change, is about Dr. Alzheimer himself. And it was Dr. Alzheimer who described this disease in 1906. August Dieter was his patient. You see her fading away there. And in his interview with her from his notebook, he says, 55-year-old woman with memory loss, hallucinations, screaming for hours in the middle of the night. Frequently she would cry, "Oh God, I have lost myself." Because this is the disease that basically disconnects your brain and who you are from yourself. And I'm going to show you why that happens. And the problem is in this part of the brain here called the hippocampus, which is Greek for seahorse, and it's right around here around the side of your head. And this particular area of the brain is where all your sensory information comes in, the color red, shapes like cars and wagons. And now you have to make sense of that information based on everything you've learned since you were an infant. And that's exactly what goes wrong in this part of the brain, is that the signals are coming in. And these are electrochemical signals. You know, an infant sees a red shoe and has no idea what it is. It's red, it has the shape of a shoe, but you have to then put that into context and say, oh yeah, a red shoe. My friend Deepak Chopra wears red clogs sometime. Okay, that comes from memory and from all of the imprinting you make your whole life. So in Alzheimer's, these signals come in and they hit the hippocampus, but the hippocampus has increasing amounts of trouble integrating those signals from your eyes, your ears, your nose into meaningful information, meaning that you see, you hear, you touch things, and you can make sense of it. I know what that is, that's a shoe. Because that same information is going to be recalled later as memory, and everything you see and experience every day, you're putting in context of what you already know. If you can no longer do that, you gradually lose your connection with the world. You also lose your connection with the self that has been prepared by this neural network of 100 billion neurons and trillions of synapses your whole life. Alzheimer's disease just basically takes this tapestry, this network of who you are, and takes it apart thread by thread every single day. It's the worst disease most can imagine. And the reason is this pathology. The amyloid plaques, which are these big, sticky, boulder-like things outside of the nerve cells in the brain. And then inside the nerve cells, you get these wispy things called tangles, which is part of what's called tauopathy, because it's tau protein, as it's called, that makes up the tangles. The amyloid's made up of what's called amyloid beta protein, or A-beta. And then there's neuroinflammation. This is the brain's reaction to the plaques and the tangles and the cell death. And neuroinflammation, like inflammation in the body, is meant to protect the body. But just like in COVID, too much of an inflammatory response can lead to death. In Alzheimer's, too much of a neuroinflammatory reaction can lead to dementia. Now, back in 1984, I was a Harvard student at Harvard Medical School, and this paper came out, real little paper from George Glenner in San Diego, who found that the amyloid plaque is made of this protein he called amyloid beta protein. He predicted there'd be a gene for it. He predicted the gene would be on chromosome 21 because Down syndrome patients have a lot of this amyloid in their brain as they age, and they have an extra copy of chromosome 21. At the time, it just so happened I was mapping chromosome 21. I was the main authority on that chromosome back then. So I said, let me see if this is real. And I got to tell you, my superiors at Harvard said, there is no gene for amyloid. It's just a garbage dump. Don't bother. Well, luckily, I didn't listen because in 1987, we and 2 other groups found the gene that makes the amyloid. And then shortly after that, the first mutations were found in the amyloid gene. And that became the first Alzheimer's gene by 1991. And that led to this, which is now 4 different genes in the 80s and 90s. These are the early onset familial genes with over nearly 300 mutations that guarantee the disease. Then there's ApoE, a risk factor you might know about, where this E4 variant of ApoE, it's in 20% of the population, increases risk, doesn't guarantee. These guarantee disease by early onset under 50 years old. All 4 genes all led to amyloid beta protein in different ways. They all led to the excessive accumulation of amyloid in the brain. So that led to the amyloid hypothesis that maybe amyloid causes this disease. Well, it just so happens when we put these genes into mice, this was back in the 90s and early 2000s, they would get the plaques. But if amyloid's causing the disease, they should cause these tangles to kill the nerve cells. Well, in the mice, it didn't happen. So now there's a classic, what we call hand-waving argument in science. The hand-waving argument says, yeah, well, probably there's like all these 10 different steps from an amyloid plaque to a tangle and death, and the mouse just doesn't live long enough. Well, as it turns out, that's not true. It's just that the mice can't make tangles. Now we know that mice can't make them. And in 2014, my colleague Do-Yeon Kim and I, we published in Nature this paper where we created mini brain organoids, human brain, mini brains, stem cell-derived nerve cells, human nerve cells grown in a gel-like matrix, like a mini brain, in a well in a dish. And by putting in the Alzheimer's genes there, where now you have human neurons in a facsimile of a mini brain, you get plaques in 4 weeks, wait 1 more week, you get the tangles. Direct 1 arrow amyloid to tangles. So that told us, indeed, amyloid is driving the disease. Alzheimer's is an amyloid-induced tauopathy. The amyloid's coming here. It causes the tangles to form. That's called tauopathy. As nerve cells die, that tells the brain to freak out and trigger neuroinflammation. Cytokine storm, you've heard about in COVID. This is cytokine storm in the brain. And now you get cell death. But guess what? You can get tangles other ways. Lots of bangs to the head will get you tangles. No need for amyloid. There are specific genetic mutations that cause what are called tauopathies, like Pick's disease, frontal lobe dementia, et cetera. No need for amyloid. So the lesson here is that there are different ways to get these nerve cells to form the tangles and die. And this would trigger the neuroinflammation that kills many more nerve cells. But the most common way in human is Alzheimer's disease, where you get amyloid accumulation starting very early in life by around middle age. And that's what we've learned about the sequence of events. So then you might ask, well, I read in the papers that all these amyloid trials, they fail. Everybody targeting amyloid, they don't make the patients better, right? Maybe there's one exception, maybe Biogen's trial, they might get approval there. But for most of the trials, hitting amyloid did not make people cognitively better in Alzheimer's trials. And now we know why. And it's because, see this red line? This is the amyloid coming up. And by the time it levels off and plateaus, that's when dementia begins. So it's kind of like if you're giving somebody a drug for amyloid and they already have dementia, it's kind of like having someone who just had a heart attack, congestive heart failure, and you give them Lipitor and say, just lower your cholesterol, you'll be fine. Well, you had to do that 10 years before, okay? So now we think about amyloid-induced tangles as the initiating pathology, but that has to trigger neuroinflammation, as I'll show you, to get the disease. And that's going to tell us how to treat this disease and prevent this disease. So what do we do in the future? In the future, what we'll do is we'll predict who has the disease early on, looking at family history and carrying out what we call a polygenic risk score. And when you start getting toward that trouble age, where according to your family history or your genetics, you may start the pathology even a decade, 2 or 3 before dementia, you want to do early detection, see if you're on your way. So early detection can be through right now brain imaging. We can see tangles and plaques by brain imaging. There's a new blood test. It's very exciting, just a few weeks ago, called tau-217. It's a specific marker for Alzheimer's disease because it tells you amyloid's in the brain already and it's causing the tangles to form, tau-217. Another marker, NFL, stands for neurofilament light chain, is a marker for neurodegeneration. So the future will be, you'll have a blood test, you'll know whether that pathology is beginning before symptoms, you might verify that with imaging. You might also do tests like an eye test. I developed with colleagues at React Neuro, a VR device that does eye scanning, voice recognition, cognitive testing. You might have tests that are done on your phone at home. All this combination is going to be used for early detection. Then most importantly, in the future, after you know you're in trouble, we will give you a little white pill or tell you what to do in your life to bring that pathology back down. This is the future. In this regard, for 20 years, I've been working with my colleague, Steve Wagner, to develop what are called gamma secretase modulators. I won't get into the details, but this is a drug that lowers the amyloid, and we believe it would do so safely. Just like if you find out you have high cholesterol when you're 40 years old and you have a family history of heart disease, you start bringing your cholesterol levels down, especially if lifestyle wasn't good enough to do it. This is going to be a way to bring the amyloid down safely. Our phase 1 clinical trials are expected to start next year. Now, importantly, I want to say that just like we don't want to wipe cholesterol out, you just want to bring it down to a safe level. Same thing with amyloid. You're saying, what? You want amyloid in the brain at some level? Yes, because it turns out, as my colleague Rob Moyer, who passed away in December last year with a glioblastoma after a short battle, and he was an amazing scientist. He came up with this revolutionary hypothesis that we championed, showing that amyloid beta protein plays a role in the brain. It's actually an antimicrobial peptide. It's made in the brain and to protect against any pathogens, viruses, or bacteria that might sneak into the brain. The amyloid beta protein sticks to them and forms a plaque to trap it. So the amyloid plaques are actually trapping these microbes, and it helps drive the disease. And so this is just, so we don't want to wipe A beta out. We want to bring it down to a safe level is the bottom line. Now, so what I told you was the future will be that we detect amyloid and tangles early, a decade or two before symptoms, and we will prevent them early with a variety of drugs. But what do we do right now for a patient who already has dementia? And here's where I have to tell you an analogy. The amyloid plaque is like a match. Sorry. The amyloid plaque is like a match, and it causes the tangles to form, which are like brush fires that spread through the brain. And then you can live with those. So it turns out that sometimes people die with no dementia, they're in their 80s, and you look in their brain and there's just as many plaques and tangles as Alzheimer's disease. And the pathologist says, this was an Alzheimer's patient. Nope, the person died with no cognitive problems. And what you see in these rare brains, what are called mismatch or resilient brains, is when they have as many plaques and tangles as Alzheimer's, but no dementia when they die, the answer is always the same. Somehow they didn't have neuroinflammation. Just like some people get a COVID virus, but they don't get that big inflammatory response, so they don't even get any symptoms. Well, in Alzheimer's, that can happen much less frequently, where the plaques and tangles are killing nerve cells, but you don't get inflammation in the brain, and thus you don't get dementia. So that's great news, because you can have plaques and tangles, but if you don't trigger neuroinflammation, you don't get the disease. The second part of this is, if you want to help a patient who has Alzheimer's right now, you have to put out the fire. Neuroinflammation is the fire. The plaques, the tangles got you there. That was initiating. So how do we help patients right now? We have to put out that fire. It's too late to blow out the match or stamp out the brush fire. Neuroinflammation is now too rampant. So we developed a new Alzheimer's in a dish model where we've included not just plaques and tangles, but the neuroinflammation that is driven by these little cells in the brain called microglia. Now, normally these little microglia are good guys. During deep sleep, they're cleaning the brain of amyloid and other debris. But when they see neurons dying, let's say they're cleaning up and they taste a neuron that died, they freak out and they're saying, we got to take out this part of the brain. It's infected. There's something wrong. Wipe it out. And that's what neuroinflammation is. And here's what they do. I'll show you what it looks like. This is a neuron. Look at these little red guys. They're eating. That's an axon. See this neuron? It's an axon going to make a synapse. This is in the dish. We're modeling this in a mini human brain organoid in a petri dish. And you can see the microglial cells eating that axon. It's looping back and forth. Look over here on the left. You'll see the snapback of that axon because a microglial cell ate a synapse. This is what happens in the brain of an Alzheimer patient. The plaques and tangles trigger these guys to go nuts, and they start eating the neurons and the axons and wiping everything out. So then we learned, okay, this is what we have to stop. So in a nutshell, we did all kinds of drug testing. Because we could have Alzheimer's in a dish, now we can test drugs 100 times faster, 100 times cheaper, because we don't have to use mice. And it's more relevant because at least in the dish, the plaques make the tangles. That didn't happen in the mice. So we did this type of testing. And I'll just give you the summary. We found 8, we screened all the FDA approved drugs that are safe. We screened about 1,000 or so natural products that are safe in the dishes. We found 8 new drugs and natural products to stop the plaques. We found 50 of them that don't let the amyloid cause the tangles. So these stop the initiation of the disease. These could be used later on for early intervention, after early detection. But most importantly, for people suffering right now, we found 24 drugs that stop the neuroinflammation. And that's what you need to help a patient who's already suffering. So I just want to show you a couple of, at least one success from this. About 7 years ago, I was approached by two kids. They were undergrads from Brown. And because I was in the Sigma Chi fraternity in college, they were Sigma Chi's at Brown. You know, they asked for a meeting, I took the meeting, and they had this idea about how to, they'd read my work, and they had an idea for how to protect neurons, nerve cells, from neuroinflammation. Their names are Justin Klee and Josh Cohen. They're here on the author list. This paper just came out in New England Journal of Medicine this last week. This was in the New York Times today. This is the cover story of the Science Times today, as I'm speaking. And they had an idea for how to protect neurons against neuroinflammation. And we also tested this in the dish model, as I talked about. And it turns out that not just in Alzheimer's, but in ALS and Parkinson's disease, any neurodegenerative disease, there's initiating pathology in some part of the brain or central nervous system that then triggers neuroinflammation. But the neuroinflammation is what you need to kill enough nerve cells to get the disease, to get the symptoms. So the idea was maybe if you protect against neuroinflammation in ALS, you might help them. And sure enough, this successful clinical trial was just published, in which the ALS patients on drug were improved significantly over those on placebo. And now the company, Amylyx, and I am part of the company, I'm a scientific co-founder and head of the SAB for the company for transparency. And now the company is going for approval for this drug for ALS. And by the way, the ALS patients in this trial were on either one or both of the existing ALS drugs. So this was improvement above and beyond the existing ALS drugs. And now we're also doing a trial with the same drug in Alzheimer's disease, the same combination drug, to see if you can prevent and protect against neuroinflammation there to treat Alzheimer's. We'll have those trial results at the end of the year. Also at the end of this year, we'll have other trial results coming out from another company I'm working with called AZ Therapeutics. This is a drug that's been reformulated to get into the brain, and it stops the microglial cells. It stops the neuroinflammation itself. So this is the summary here of these little microglial cells. Normally they're good. They're clearing amyloid. They're doing a nice job. They're beneficial. But if they become inflammatory, they start eating neurons. And the Amylyx drug is meant to protect the neurons from this process. AZ Therapies is meant to convert the microglia. And we'll hear about both of these Alzheimer trials at the end of this year. And Amylyx already had one successful trial in ALS. Now, while we're waiting, so the summary of this part of the talk, and I'll end in a few minutes with just some last suggestions, is if you want to treat Alzheimer's patients now, you have to hit neuroinflammation. But in the future, we will detect the pathology, the initiating pathology early in life, decades before symptoms, and stop that pathology from even getting to the point of decimating the brain with neuroinflammation. In the meantime, what can we do while we're waiting for these drugs to come online? And this is where, based on the books I wrote with Deepak Chopra, Super Brain, Super Genes, and most recently The Healing Self, I came up with an acronym summarizing all of the suggestions Deepak Chopra and I made in these books for keeping a healthy brain and reducing inflammation. And I used the acronym SHIELD, which stands for sleep, handle stress, interactions with others, exercise, learn new things, and diet. I tweeted this out and it kind of went viral, and now it's been on a lot of TV shows and news shows and the Today Show. And so it's kind of out there. Just to reiterate it, during sleep is when those little microglial cells, when they're behaving, clean your brain. So you want to get enough deep sleep, 7 to 8 hours a day, right after your dream, your brain is cleaning itself with these little helper cells that help get the debris out. So you want to clean, I call it mental floss, clean your brain every night with enough sleep. Handle stress. Deepak helped put together a meditation trial we did with Elizabeth Blackburn, Nobel laureate, who discovered telomerase, and Eric Schott and Alyssa Appel. What we found was that just 1 week of meditation, and to some extent just vacation, relaxing, was activating very beneficial gene networks, reducing inflammation, even turning down some of the genes that drive Alzheimer's disease. So meditation, handling stress. Stress can cause chronic inflammation in the body. Interaction with others. Loneliness increases risk for Alzheimer's twofold. Now, being alone doesn't. If you're alone and like it, that's fine. If you're alone and stressed, loneliness can be a risk factor. So staying social is important. Exercise. We had a paper in Science last year showing that exercise induces the birth of new nerve cells in the hippocampus, the battleground for Alzheimer's. And it also induces a very helpful growth factor called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So we figured out that this is how exercise was able to improve cognition in these Alzheimer's mice. And now we're trying to find supplements that might do the same thing. And right now we're testing True Niagen, which is nicotinamide riboside, to induce neurogenesis. I started a company that makes this Perceptor supplement. It's cat's claw from Peru. It's a woody vine. And we're using this to try to induce BDNF and stop neuroinflammation. So these are being tested in the mice now because they're safe to supplements. And the idea would be if they work, we can do a trial to see if they help in Alzheimer's disease. Learn new things. So right now, if you're learning something new, I'm helping your brain. If I'm putting you to sleep, I'm still helping your brain. You can look at it that way. When you learn new things, you make new synapses. What correlates with dementia and Alzheimer's is loss of synapses. So the more synapses you make, the more synapses you can lose before you lose it. You also, as you make new synapses, because you learn by associating new things with things you already knew, you're building up all your neural networks and synaptic reserve. So especially when you're going to retire, don't just think about financial reserve, think about synaptic reserve. Build up those synapses, make that neuronal network stronger. Finally, diet. And it turns out that the Mediterranean diet, you all know this, is the most successful diet for aging. More fiber, fruits, nuts, vegetables, leafy greens, seeds, etc. That plant fiber, plant-based diet keeps your gut microbiome happy. So if some of you take probiotics, that's fine, but more importantly, keep those trillions of bacteria you already have in your gut happy, because when those gut bacteria are in balance, they keep the brain healthy. We have published several papers that show that the gut microbiome in an Alzheimer's mice can directly affect the pathology in the brain. This is the gut-brain axis, as it's called. So diet, Mediterranean diet, especially a plant-based diet. We have a new center at Mass General called the McCance Center for Brain Health that I co-direct, where we're doing all of this work, identifying the biomarkers for brain health, trying lifestyle interventions to see what really works. You know, it's one thing for me to tell you, get more sleep and diet, et cetera. But imagine if we had the clinical trials to prove it, so we don't just have to say, trust me. That's what our McCance Center is doing. So that's what we hope. So I want to end by summarizing the advice I just gave you in this last part of the talk. And I can summarize it this way. Sleep more, meditate more, see family and friends more, move more, learn more, eat better and less, and choose your ancestors wisely, because genetics also makes a difference here. And I'm finally, I just want to show all the members of my Genetics and Aging Research Unit at Mass General who do much of the work I showed you. I want to thank Cure Alzheimer's Fund, Open Philanthropy, Good Ventures, the JPP Foundation, and the National Institute on Aging for their support. I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow.
Thanks, Rudy. Appreciate that. So if you had to simplify for a public layperson's understanding of the difference between Alzheimer's and just general dementia or even ALS, what should people think about it? Is it plaques and tangles relate to Alzheimer's? But then what would you associate with general dementia?
Yeah. So in each neurodegenerative disease, there are certain proteins that don't fold right and cause cell death. So in Parkinson's disease, we have the Lewy bodies. There's also Lewy body dementia. In Alzheimer's, we have the plaques, amyloid causing the tangles. In ALS, you can have something called superoxide dismutase misfolding, or you can have something called C9orf or TDP43. So all these neurodegenerative diseases have different initiating pathology to kill X number of neurons. But when neuroinflammation is the reaction to that by the brain, that kills 100X neurons. And that's when the fire begins. So I like to say that all these different misfolded proteins are the match, and then you get propagating pathology, but the neuroinflammation has to be triggered. And that takes decades. Think about CTE. The head bangs come in your teens and 20s. You don't get the disease until your 50s or 60s, because it takes decades of this pathology to propagate and cause neuroinflammation until that forest fire is big enough that you succumb to the symptoms. That's why you have to treat the forest fire and those who already have symptoms.
Right. And that sort of physical damage that occurs, do you see that in athletes? You take care of a lot of sport team athletes as well. So do you see increased Alzheimer's rates in those types of people?
Well, surprisingly, like in the NFL, because they're in such good shape, their risk for Alzheimer's and some diseases that involve neurovascular events I didn't talk about, like stroke, they're actually neutral or protected. What you do see a little bit more, what you see more of is frontal lobe dementia, CTE, and ALS, because they're directly getting tangles with those head bangs. And it's not just concussions, but we think about the frequency of head bangs and the intensity. It's frequency times intensity you have to look at. So yeah, you have to take special care. So when I advise professional teams, I talk about supplements, I talk about shield. They have to go above and beyond to protect their brains because every day they're getting knocked in the head.
You're one of your companies that you just talked about that's been receiving news this past week, including today, came out with a new drug for ALS. How does the drug development for ALS impact sort of drug development for Alzheimer's? Is there a crossover? Can they help in some way, or how do those fit together?
Yeah, so if you're stopping neuroinflammation, or if you're protecting nerve cells against it, any drug that's successful in Alzheimer's can be used in ALS, Alzheimer's. You can use an anti-neuroinflammatory drug or a protective drug against neuroinflammation across diseases. But for the future, when we want to prevent these diseases from happening, you have to prevent the initiating pathology to get you. Right. So that's different in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS. That will be very disease specific for early detection, early intervention. But if you want to treat patients suffering right now, you got to stop neuroinflammation, and those drugs should work across the platform.
So as you know, one of my particular focuses and interests is around human aging and looking at medical interventions to try and deal with the diseases of aging. Do you consider Alzheimer's a disease of aging? Are there common pathways that as we try to tackle aging might impact Alzheimer's, or do you see it as a separate mechanism?
So I'm in the camp of aging is basically getting closer and closer to disease. I don't necessarily subscribe to magic bullets of aging. So I think of what is the biggest challenge to the aging brain? And to answer that question, I say, what is the most common brain disease with aging? And that's Alzheimer's. So that means that, and now we know that as we get older, we start to build up the same pathology that you see in Alzheimer's. And that's when you have to hit it. And you can, so, you know, if you think about aging and you want to think about an organ, look at the disease that's most common in that organ with age. And then that's what you have to hit. So you never get to the disease stage. That's how you get anti-aging drugs and lifestyle. I kind of take that perspective.
Right, because the National Institute of Aging has this giant budget, which mostly goes to Alzheimer's.
Because we have 5.6 million patients and we have 38 million people on their way.
Right.
So it dwarfs COVID.
Yeah, for sure. So have you seen, by the way, the prevalence of Alzheimer's change over the years? If you look back at this in some way, has it increased in prevalence or really the same? Or what did you guess?
So it was increasing and increasing, and it's still increasing. But now the thing is that I didn't talk about this, but part of the insult that can get the pathology going can be neurovascular, mini strokes. And if you have a healthy heart, you have a healthy brain. So because we've been getting so much more heart healthy, taking care of our cholesterol, we're reducing neurovascular disease and stroke, and that's actually led to a little dip in the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, fortunately.
Okay, so I'm wondering what would be the most wild idea that you've seen? For example, are any of these concepts around brain-computer interface technologies or mapping the neuronal networks of a brain, optogenetics, much better imaging systems. What's the sort of, for lack of a better word, sexy new technology, interesting new approach that we really need a lot more research, but may hold some promise from a theoretical perspective that excites you?
Yeah, I think, since the future will be early detection, early intervention, I think any way we can detect these diseases early, whether it's blood-based biomarkers, new imaging modalities, new digital devices like the one I'm developing that uses a VR format, eye scanning, voice recognition, something you can do on your phone or watch every day, actigraphy, that's important. For treatment, I think getting away from mice and getting more into brain organoids and mini brains like we're using for Alzheimer's that are more relevant to what really goes on with human neurons is also very important. Optogenetics in terms of turning on certain neurons on and off, that's how you can translate it to studies in mice. But I think, we have to also use more of the drugs that are already safe and natural products rather than always trying to reinvent the wheel, because we found almost 100 different drugs and natural products to hit Alzheimer's pathology. They're already out there and safe. We can start doing our platform clinical trials with those now.
Yeah. So we're in a world of COVID and there's vaccines. Do you see vaccines playing a role? I know there's some people exploring that connection to Alzheimer's. Do you see that as something that we would have a vaccine for Alzheimer's, or that doesn't make sense for this mechanism?
Well, the vaccinations against Alzheimer's, vaccines have to do with vaccinating against amyloid. And the idea is that amyloid is just junk. And so I worry if you have just an unbridled immune response to a vaccine and make tons of antibody to amyloid, if that wipes out all the amyloid in your brain, I think your brain will be in trouble because, like my colleague Rob Moyer that I found, amyloid plays an antimicrobial role. And don't forget that the one vaccine trial that was done 20 years ago, 3 people got encephalitis, which is probably herpes-related encephalitis. And we know that amyloid is very, very potent against trapping herpes in the brain and protecting the brain against herpes infection.
So you're a musician. You record with Aerosmith on occasion. Music is all about patterns. The brain is about patterns. Have you seen any correlation in the way musicians who get Alzheimer's deal with it? In a sense, do they lose their ability to play music differently than someone's ability to speak? Do you see any connection between music and Alzheimer's in that sense?
Well, the amazing thing is that if you follow how the pathology of Alzheimer's spreads in the brain, kind of from hippocampus and then the back and up and around.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how does it propagate?
It propagates. So if you can see me, so the hippocampus, then it goes to the occipital lobe in the back, up and around parietal lobe, temporal lobe.
Okay, so you, just so people understand, when you do brain imaging, you can see some sort of plaque buildup or something in that particular
Plaques
area.
and tangles, yeah.
And you can see that over time go a specific sort of route.
Yeah, if you're an aficionado of the connectome project of mapping all these pathways in the brain,
yeah,
it's the default mode network. So the default mode network, when it's active, is what's propagating this pathology. Default mode network gives you your personality for better or for worse. When you're daydreaming, when you're judging, when you're worrying, when you're anxious, whenever you're idling and not task-driven or meditating, that's what's turned on. So we tell people, turn that off as much as you can.
So again, if you're a musician or just a non-musician and you start worrying about, hey, do I have Alzheimer's? Are there certain things that begin in those areas that relate to the brain that people can say, yeah, I'm doing that wrong a lot or something? How would you?
Well, I mean, the amazing thing is that the music memory part of the brain is spared. So if you already know certain songs, you might not be able to put a sentence together and you're in a nursing home with severe Alzheimer's, but you can still get to the piano and play and remember lyrics, because memory for lyrics and music is a different spot than language assembly.
Yeah.
So you may have a tough time learning new songs, but the songs and stuff you already know, you can keep playing for a real long time, because that part of the brain is just remarkably spared in this propagation of the pathology.
Yeah. So here's a question I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to, but this is a little bit of a divergence, but I think it's important because people with Alzheimer's need care, and caregivers undergo a tremendous amount of stress taking care of people. Are there any technologies you've seen that can help caregivers take care of people with Alzheimer's? Maybe it's technologies that actually monitor the person. Is there anything out there that is being used in a unique way, because it's very hard to take care of someone with Alzheimer's?
you know, I don't know, I mean, technology for remembering to take pills and stuff like that's out there. There
It's
is,
called location-based type of stuff to make
yeah,
sure they
I mean,
don't
we're
wander
working
off.
on, you know, like a light flashing and sound technology that can help induce microglial cells to stop being inflammatory. We're testing that still in the lab. So maybe there may be technologies that are non-invasive bioelectronic devices we're working on. But mainly for a caregiver, what they need to know is the best thing they can do is take a drama class or an improvisational drama class, because the more they can, you know, nod and say yes to the patient and be improvisational and not challenge them and say, no, 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 that's not right, but just go with it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
The more you're going to stop the agitation, the frustration, the anger, just go, you just got to learn how to improvise and go with it, even if it's ridiculous.
All right. And Rudy, my last question before I hand it back to Glenda. If you had to guess now where we're at, when will we really overcome this disease and be able to both treat, and maybe these are two different timelines, treat people that have it and prevent people from getting it? If you had to put your best guess on it.
I think we'll have the first drugs that treat it in symptomatic people by helping protect against the neuroinflammation or stop neuroinflammation soon. I would say.
But I mean, really treat it, like they will not die from it.
Meaning that if you think about neuroinflammation like a forest fire and you put it out, the forest grows back. I mean, Deepak and I wrote in Super Brain just how incredibly regenerative the brain is. Stop the insult, stop the fire, things, you know, there is regeneration of synapses. So I'm more optimistic that if we can just stop, think about somebody with a urinary tract infection who's delirious. And then as soon as the infection stops, they're back. This is like a chronic delirium, because just like a UTI is causing temporary inflammation,
right?
This disease, there's chronic inflammation in the brain, chronic cytokine storm. You turn that off, I'm optimistic you give the brain a chance to come back. So I think for symptomatic patients, stop neuroinflammation, but you also have to hit the initiating pathology there too, so you don't get new fibers.
Okay.
So that is going to come first. And I think a year or two, maybe 2 years away, we might start seeing those first drugs. We already got one that works in ALS. It's being tried in Alzheimer's now. We got another Alzheimer trial reading out in December of this year. I'm hoping that within a year or two, we're going to start seeing the first drugs looking for approval that put out the fire. For the future of drugs that you would use as an intervention after early detection, the FDA needs to work with us. Because if the FDA wants an amyloid drug to make an Alzheimer's patient better cognitively, and they keep the bar that high, you will never get the drug.
Gotcha.
It's like saying, I'm not going to approve a statin for cholesterol until you show me that it makes somebody with congestive heart failure better.
Right.
So the FDA needs to get that before they need to understand this before we can go forward. They need to let us do trials on biomarkers that say we're doing the right thing pre-symptomatically. And then if it's safe enough, let it out there. Don't make us have to treat initiating pathology and make people cognitively better. It's too tough.
Right. Thank you, Rudy. Appreciate it. I know the audience has a lot of questions and Glenda has some as well. So pleasure talking to you today.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you both. Rudy, such a brilliant exposition of the latest research. We're very, very thankful. And Mark, to you for those very insightful questions. We do have a ton of questions from the audience. I'm just going to do a couple of real quick ones. Rudy, I just love the fact that you are a musician and have been called a brain health rock star scientist. So that's what you are in my mind all the time. I'm so thrilled that you're on our Aspen Brain Institute Scientific Advisory Council. I'm especially pleased that you are always talking about brain health, because we've gotten so tired of trying to fight the disease. I know you're still fighting the disease of dementia, but to always be looking at early intervention, early detection, lifestyle change, it's what I think is going to get us there while we're waiting for these miracle drugs. So thank you so much for the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Rudy, when you and I first talked, I know that about or half or some of your research is about brain health supplements that can help us along the way before we get to the miracle drugs. And you actually promised me a list of the brain health supplements that you take. And you do have some conflicts, which you mentioned. Some companies that you believe in, of course, are your own companies or your own initiated companies. But could you tell us a few, because it's very difficult, as we discussed, it's very difficult for the layperson to figure out what are the science-based brain health supplements. Could you give us a little information about your experience, recommendations perhaps?
So first of all, thank you for all your kind comments, Glenda. Thank you for all you do with Aspirin Brain Institute, and it's a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak this evening. I want to say that there's a big difference between scientific data and laboratory models using supplements versus clinical trials. Same thing with lifestyle interventions, right? Until you do a clinical trial on a lifestyle intervention like sleep or diet or exercise or on a supplement, no one should say that they're going to stop or reverse Alzheimer's disease. You can't just treat somebody with a supplement and say, oh, I know this guy will get better. That's anecdotal. You have to do the trial. So anything I say about supplements, we don't yet have clinical trials to say anything about the disease.
Okay.
We only have data from laboratory models to say, hey, this is how we can hit plaques and tangles and neuroinflammation. Along those lines, we've been screening like over 1,000 natural products to say what does stop plaques or tangles and neuroinflammation. And yes, I do take those supplements. And yes, I do recommend them to local sports teams to protect their brains because they're getting banged up every single day. The ones I like best, cat's claw, which is this woody vine from the Amazonian rainforest. I started a company with Alan Snow to get an organic, sustainable source of that. We sell it. He does it. I'm just a co-founder in name and did the science with him. But it's called Percepta, P-E-R-C-E-P-T-A. I do have an equity stake in that company for transparency purposes. But we published a 90-page paper in Nature Scientific Reports last year showing it hits plaques and tangles, neuroinflammation, but we've never done an Alzheimer's trial. So we can't make any claims other than it looks good in the lab, it's safe, give it a shot, so I give it a shot. Nicotinamide riboside, I take, that's probably another one of my favorites because it increases energy in cells. It increases the ATP, which is the energy of the mitochondria. As we get older, our batteries start to go down. Our cellular energy goes down. So if you can take a supplement that brings the energy back up, I think that's very useful. And we also found the nicotinamide riboside, and I recommend a true Niagen from Chromadex, and I do work with Chromadex as a consultant, is able to induce neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons in the brain. And in this study we published in Science on Alzheimer's mice who get demented, when they have enough inflammation, if we were able to give them a running wheel, they got better. And we figured out what that does. It induces the birth of new neurons, neurogenesis, but that's not enough. You have to also induce a growth factor that keeps the new neurons that were born alive. That growth factor is BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So we're trying to find combinations of supplements that do each thing, increase neurogenesis and keep those baby neurons alive with BDNF. And so right now we're testing nicotinamide riboside and Percepta for that purpose, along with some others. Other supplements that induce BDNF include coffee fruit extract, bacopa, monieri, and thiamine. Those are the biggies. Now, I also take antioxidants. For antioxidants, the ones that worked really well in the dish model were quercetin, also fisetin. I also take omega-3s. I don't take fish oil because I think fish oil, unless you get really good fish oil, is polluted with heavy metals because of what we're doing to our oceans. So I take a vegan-based omega-3 that's made from algae, vegan-based omega-3s. There's really great data coming out about how omega-3s help stop tangles and neuroinflammation in the brain. Again, no trial, that's one way they did do a trial. And that would be transcending into, actual use where you can say it helped disease. Vitamin D3. Vitamin D3, I now up to 2,000 units a day. We're at 1,000 is the normal dose. Because with COVID around, vitamin D3 reduces the cytokine storm. It helps reduce the cytokine levels. So I'm telling folks during COVID, take vitamin D3, especially if you're not getting much sun. B vitamins like B12. And those are the biggies. I also take an Ayurvedic called ashwagandha from Douglas Labs. I'm not involved with Douglas Labs. Ashwagandha helps get amyloid out of the brain. There's studies that show it helps get amyloid out of the brain. Again, for all of these supplements, no clinical trials have basically been done except the omega-3s. So no claims, just they're safe and give it a shot if you're willing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I know there'll be a lot of interest in that. As you were speaking about that with heart and other organs, we are good at early detection and early intervention, and we don't wait for those organs to deteriorate before we start treating them. So I really want to ask you, and I know you've discussed part of this, but is there a test for brain health? How can I tell if my brain is in good shape today? And also, what I really want to know is, should I or the rest of the world or our communities be taking a cognitive baseline assessment in our late 20s, early 30s, so that we can test against ourselves how we're progressing in cognitive performance?
So it's a great question. Right now, we don't have, we have a cognitive test like MoCA you can take, which are pretty simple questions, the old elephant and camel thing or whatever you've heard about in the news. So the MoCA is a cognitive test you can take every year with your physician. But cognitive testing tells you about the brain no more than how fast or how long you can run tells you about the heart. It's an output. You're not looking at the brain itself. We don't have a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff equivalent for the brain. When you go to your physician every year for your routine physical, you get a physical, you don't get a mental. Patrick Kennedy and I like to say, you don't get a checkup from the neck up. When you get from the neck up, they look in the holes in your head, the ears, nostrils, eyes, mouth. They don't care about your brain. So that's why we started this McCance Center, because we want to figure out how to quantify brain health. Blood tests, digital technologies, eye tests, voice analysis, combined with cognitive testing, like I'm doing with this company called React Neuro. You want to be able to figure out the minimal imaging, brain imaging fingerprint that tells you how the brain is doing. And then you want AI and machine learning to take the blood biomarkers, the imaging, the digital results, combine those together to give you a brain health index, a brain health assessment. So that's in process. We don't do that yet. That's why we started our center, to try to get to a point where we can come up with real brain health factors that you can quantify and then in an algorithm combine to get a brain health index. That's our goal.
Rudy, thank you. Are other institutes or academic or otherwise studying what you're studying, trying to amalgamate all these different kinds of quantifying of brain health?
I think the closest one to us would be Richard Isaacson in New York at the Cornell Weill. And we're planning, before COVID, we were planning on all kinds of meetings together to combine forces. But at the McCance Center, we want to really be a hub where we'll bring in all the image. We're starting an imaging consortium, a biomarker consortium, digital technologies. And we want to use these to do trials on sleep, exercise, diet, so we can say things with authority rather than trust me, sleep is good. That's going to be our goal. But first you have to learn how to quantify brain health. And that's what we're really doing. It's amazing how relative to heart disease, we're at square one. We're working with Dean Ornish. Dean Ornish is doing a lifestyle intervention for Alzheimer's right now. We're collaborating with Dean. So people are, Dean, what Dean did for the heart, we're hoping he'll help us do with the brain. So we're all working together on this type of thing.
And we're actually supporting the documentary film that Dean will be making with Louis Sahoyos.
Oh, wonderful.
What the outcomes are, because that's going to be really important to get the word out, especially if it appears to be successful as it does.
You know, I just gotta say, I know, I saw in the chat people asking about Dale Bredesen's program.
Okay,
And I want to say, you know, Dale, what Dale suggests in his book is very similar to what many of us have all suggested in our books. I mean, there's not a lot new on what we can suggest about lifestyle and what we can do. I think that what we have, when we do talk about suggesting lifestyle interventions or supplements or this and that, I think we do also have to, you know, be careful with expectations. That right now, because we haven't done clinical trials yet, it's really, we can't tell a family we're going to end or reverse Alzheimer's. Okay, those are big terms to use. We can just say, here's the best you can do right now to help reduce your risk. And we're going to do trials that will hopefully add some authority to this in the future. I think Dale agrees with that. We agree with that. But, you know, whether Dale says it or Deepak says it with the 6 pillars of health, or me with Shield, or Dale with his different aspects, we're all basically saying the same thing. It comes down to how to live a healthy life to help your brain. But I want to see the trials done so we can say this with more authority.
fantastic. We're hoping for the same. I have so many questions, and half of them I can't even understand. Well, I think you've answered this, but what are some natural products that stop neuroinflammation? I think you've mentioned
Yeah,
that.
the ones I mentioned were all basically targeted at neuroinflammation. The ashwagandha is targeted at the amyloid, but you know the other ones I mentioned from the you know, the cat's claw or Percepta, the omega-3s, the quercetin, the fisetin, all aimed at neuroinflammation. And then you have nicotinamide riboside's unique because it's more aimed at neurogenesis and cellular energy. So I will share my cocktail with you, Glenda. I'm sorry I didn't send it. I guess I didn't send it last time, but I will send it over.
Okay, because a lot of people want to know about it.
Yeah, well, yeah. I just don't want to be this
No, I
supplement
understand.
snake
You have to
oil
give
guy.
all
Yeah.
your reservations about the
Yeah.
fact that there are no clinical trials, but
Right.
your suggestions from what you've seen in the laboratory and perhaps your own experience.
Right. We don't want to raise expectations higher than they should be given what the science says right now. That's the important thing.
Okay, another question that says, is there emerging evidence that suggests that decreased glucose metabolism in the brain may precede cognitive decline
Well,
and
no,
go toward neuroinflammation?
I mean, glucose, when you see glucose metabolism down, it means you're already losing synapses. So when we do what's called a deoxyglucose PET scan to look at glucose utilization in the brain, if it's down, then we know synapses are down because synapses use up the most energy. And if synapses are down, we know something's already wrong. So generally we think that glucose utilization goes down because you're losing cells and synapses. And that's a marker for that. Whether glucose utilization is on the other end of triggering the disease, not a lot of evidence for that from genetics. You would think that genetics would have already, we have 30 something different genes now. None of them have pointed toward early glucose utilization problems driving the disease versus being an after effect of losing neurons and synapses. That's where we're at so far. It could change.
I remember a certain neurologist or gerontologist telling me they could tell from some test whether I might get Alzheimer's. Is that correct? Is that is there a valid test that can tell somebody if they're at risk besides genetics? Currently at risk.
Yeah, if you get brain imaging done that shows a lot of plaque, and now we can do tangles as well, and you're not suffering with symptoms, yeah, you're at higher risk. It doesn't guarantee. I'm part of what's called the Harvard Aging Brain Study with Risa Sperling, where we're following 500 people, many of whom have plaques or tangles or both, but don't have dementia. And then as we track them, we're saying we're looking for biomarkers that will predict their cognitive trajectory, given that they have that pathology in the brain. Remember, I told you that we believe there's about 38 million people in this country with amyloid in their brain.
Oh.
Just like, meaning that they're at higher risk for Alzheimer's, just like if you have high cholesterol, you're at higher risk for heart disease. You want to hit them early, okay? But you can't say it guarantees the disease. It just means you're at much higher risk.
Right. And I think from what you said earlier in another instance, that those tests are expensive. Is that correct or not?
Thousands of dollars for the imaging.
No.
And so
We
the
need
FDA
like
approved, yeah, the FDA approved, but the healthcare won't cover them because they say they're not actionable. In other words, if you get a positive amyloid test by imaging or tangle test,
Right.
there's no drug you can immediately take. You can just change your lifestyle, but there's no drug yet. So we're hoping the FDA will let us get those drugs out by allowing us to do the types of trials that don't make you have to make Alzheimer patients cognitively better. Because like I was saying, if
Yeah.
you take plaques and tangles, you're testing a patient who already has dementia, it's very tough to make them cognitively better. That's too high a bar. The FDA has to lower that bar for us. Let us let safe drugs out that will lower the plaques and tangles early. So early detection, early intervention.
That's a really important point that most people aren't aware of.
Yeah, no one's going to do a 10-year trial. You know, how are you going to do a 10-year trial? It'll cost $10 billion, $10 billion. By the time you're done, the drug's off patent. No pharma company's going to do that. So the FDA has to work with us to make this happen.
Important. Maybe last one or two questions. How much brain health is determined by genetics?
Well, a lot. I mean, if you look at the Alzheimer genes alone, right? The first Alzheimer genes we found told us about the amyloid plaque and the initiating pathology. Those are the ones we found in the 80s and 90s. But if you look at the newest Alzheimer genes we found, they mostly have to do with neuroinflammation. And back in 2008, my lab also found the first neuroinflammation gene for Alzheimer's called CD33. Now we have, I don't know, dozen and a half genes that help control your neuroinflammation set point. So what do I mean by that? I mean that as you're living your life like everybody else and you're over 40 and you're starting to make some plaques and tangles, and they're causing little pockets of cell death, everyone has their own threshold where neuroinflammation is going to come in, cytokines are going to be produced like with COVID and start triggering more cell death. Your neuroinflammation set point of your brain is determined both by genetic risk factors, but more importantly, even more by your lifestyle. So you may have genetic risk factors that predispose you to neuroinflammation, but none of them guarantee the disease. Even ApoE4 works through neuroinflammation, but doesn't guarantee the disease. Somebody had asked that question. So if you're getting enough sleep, even if it takes naps, it doesn't matter if it's sleep all night. Even with a nap, you're going to go into deep sleep and clean the brain. It's one round of mental floss. If you're eating a diet with a lot of plant-based fiber, Mediterranean diet, if you're exercising every day, if you're learning new things every day, you're staying social, if you're managing stress, you're meditating every day, you can have those genetic risk factors for neuroinflammation. That's going to lower your set point and your threshold for when the brain goes haywire with neuroinflammation. That's how to think about it.
Well, it's very hopeful, and it reflects what I had down as a quote from you that says, the good news is that in 95% of cases, how you live will offset genetics.
And I think it's even higher. I think it's 97 or 98% now.
Really?
Yes.
How incredible.
Yeah.
I got one last question, and then I want to thank everybody. This person says, what is the role of social determinants of health and the prevalence of Alzheimer's in women and communities of color? Not sure.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad they asked that. So, 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women.
Yes.
I work with the Women's Alzheimer's Movement with Maria Shriver. We just published a paper where we found genetic risk factors that are different for males versus females. You have to do these types. Any study you're doing in Alzheimer's, at some point you have to ask difference between male and female.
Right.
When you're doing it in mice or in humans. I believe that in females, that postmenopausally, as energy metabolism tends to go down as estrogen dips, and that leaves you more open to neuronal cell death vulnerability because energy is down. That's an example where glucose metabolism is coming in early on. So back to that question. And then we also know that in diseases like multiple sclerosis, that women have more neuroinflammation than men. In fact, if you look at species all the way down the evolutionary ladder, the females of the species get more inflammation than the males. So I think it's a combination of menopause, a dip in energy, and then in women that triggers a neuroinflammation set point that's more sensitive than in men. And so as we develop these anti-neuroinflammatory meds, they'll be very important for women. Now, in populations of color, you also have to think about lifestyle and neurovascular health, heart health, stroke, and these types of things, because sometimes in neighborhoods where you don't have the privilege of a whole food or organic foods, or you don't have the culture of eating a better diet, that can put you dietarily at more risk for cardiovascular and neurovascular disease. And that is automatically going to increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease. Neurovascular health is part and parcel with Alzheimer's. So educating all the young people we can about, no matter where they live or what their normal diet is, that their future health is going to depend on fixing their diet, getting more sleep. That education is going to be a big, big issue here, and especially reaching out into less privileged neighborhoods. And because frankly, yes, whether it's COVID or Alzheimer's, they're at greater risk, and we have to do something about that.
Great. Well, Rudy, thank you so much. You are so generous with your information, your research, and all your efforts. Thank you for that. You're
welcome.
Thank you enough. And Mark, we wish you luck with your new health conference, Life Itself, coming next year with Dr. Sanjay Gupta. And we thank our audience for all the great questions and for getting educated on the science of brain health. We thank our sponsors again, Lugano Diamonds and Alpine Bank, Brain Futures, and American Federation for Research on Aging. I want to remind everyone that this session was recorded and will be available on our website, aspenbraininstitute.org, in just a few days. Please check our website to sign up for the next episode. Thanks all, and ciao everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.